I'm from Kentucky. We give hugs down there. I hope that's okay. Now, I have to tell you something. I try to be honest when I address audiences. I spoke to Leon Williams, who is now my new best friend, as well as my brother in the front row. I didn't get his name, but he said he's been teaching here for 70 years, and he gave me the history of Elon University. So I've learned a lot about the campus and what you're working to do here. And I have to say, I'm pretty darn impressed. I am so impressed. And one of the things that crossed my mind, I was talking to Leon this morning, and I'm going to empty my pockets here in case you're wondering. This is how informal I can get. This is actually deodorant. And because I realized I had to get on the road, and I said, oh my goodness, I forgot my deodorant. And I fly to California right after I leave here. And I'm going to go on this TV show. You might know it's called Dr. Drew's Life Changers. And we're going to talk about spanking and whether or not black people like to spank their kids more than other cultures. And I said, well, my mother would probably spank me if I went on TV with stinky armpits. So there, that explains the deodorant. Okay, now that we've got the important stuff out of the way, one of the things I think it's important for us to understand and to really think about as we commemorate Dr. King's dream, and we talk about how we all fit into that dream, as well as our collective American dream, which is just as important, is we have to think about what this university is trying to do. Now, one of the first things that Leon told me when I asked him about this university, just to tell you the truth, whenever I talk to multicultural affairs directors, the conversations are always very honest, and some stuff you repeat, some stuff you don't, and so you're kind of ready for anything. And Leon spoke very highly of what the institution is seeking to do. He said, diversity has become our leading priority here, and the university is really putting its money where its mouth is. And so I looked at the data, and I saw that the numbers, when it comes to diversity, I'm a statistician, so I look at the numbers. The numbers are very impressive. The progress the institution has made has been very impressive. And actually on the way in this morning, he actually asked me, he said, so where do you think that our mission and diversity fits into our nation's quest for civil rights? How does it fit with Dr. King's dream? And I said, well, it kind of fits this way. I'm a football fan, and like a lot of you, I watched this game this week between Alabama and LSU. Now, that was a big game. Some people call it the game of the century. And that's the big game on the big stage. But in addition to the big game on the big stage, there are a lot of little games that are taking place all throughout the country. If you go to every town in America, there's some sort of high school rivalry in football. There are backyard battles. There are all these little battles that take place all throughout the country. And the fundamentals are the same, right? The rules are the same. You're playing the same game. You have to overcome the same obstacles. And all those little games contribute to the love of the game that our country has collectively. Without the little games, there would be no big game. No one would watch the big game because they couldn't identify with it. Well, I think that civil rights is the same way. You have the civil rights movement that took place on the national stage. That was the big game. Everybody knows about that game. But the important games, in my humble opinion, are the little games that take place all throughout the country, in every town, in every university, in every family. And how we decide to play that game, how every player on the field decides to respond to the challenges that lie in front of him or her, determine the outcomes. So when you talk about history, American history is being written every single day. And every one of us holds a tiny ink pen. And it's our decision to decide what we're going to write. So as you move forward in your commitment to diversity, which has already taken tremendous strides, but we know it still has a long way to go. There are very few battles like this that don't have a lot of things on the plate that have to be accomplished. I want to give you a warning. I want to let you know, and you probably know this, but I'm going to remind you of this, that pursuing true diversity is not easy. It's really, really difficult. It's very, very hard work. In fact, a lot of people don't know this. Everybody talks about Dr. King's speech, the I Have a Dream speech, right? You know about that. Well, I remember I had a conversation one time with Jesse Jackson's daughter, Santita. And I like talking to her because she gives me perspectives on things that I can't possibly necessarily relate to directly. And she says, one of the things that people don't know, Boyce, is that they didn't even want Dr. King to speak that day. He was one of the last speakers. He was at the bottom of the list. They said he's too radical. His ideas won't fit with what we're trying to do in this march. So there were a lot of people, maybe even a majority, who didn't even want him to appear because they felt that what he was trying to do was too much for America. And so years later, his speech is the only one people remember. Nobody else remembers that there were tons of people that spoke that day. When they have these marches and rallies, everybody wants to speak. Everybody wants their 5 minutes. But the only speech they remember is Dr. King's speech. So this adversity that comes with pursuing diversity, that comes with pursuing equality, is something that we kind of forget. We think that the dream and we think that equality and diversity can be pursued by holding hands and singing "We Shall Overcome," maybe pretending like the past didn't happen, pretending that if we all just decide to move forward as a country and become this quote-unquote post-racial society, that it'll be as if the last 400 years never occurred. And I think that's incorrect thinking. In fact, I think that talk is cheap. Most of us know that, which is why a lot of universities are very happy to do a lot of talking when it comes to diversity, because they save money. Why actually do something when you can say that you'd like to do it, or say that you actually did it, or pretend like you did, or fudge the numbers, or whatever the case may be. So in many of these universities where they find that talking about diversity is easier than actually implementing diversity, you can go and you look at the numbers and you can confront them on the numbers and you can say, well, wait a minute, why is it that you have 20 academic departments on your campus, and in 50 years of operating history, maybe 80 years, maybe 100 years, you've never hired a person of color in the entire history of that department? Do you think you're really pursuing diversity aggressively when you have numbers like that? David Duke couldn't do worse than that. And what's interesting is that when people look at those numbers and you confront them with that truth, and then they're deciding, okay, do I get angry at the messenger? Do I fudge the numbers? Do I make something up? Or do I come up with a convenient excuse? That's when they're getting the chance to write history. And so ultimately, people either come to one or two conclusions. The conclusions are either A, there is a systematic bias, something that is reflective of a part of the past that we're not necessarily proud of, that is causing this disparity, or that there's this job where there's no person of color on the planet qualified to do this job. All the dozens and dozens and scores of people that have applied for this job who happen to be different from the individuals that we've chosen to hire, all of them are simply unqualified. And you'd be amazed at what people actually end up believing. So when you talk about diversity, you talk about the hard work, the reality is that there's no way around doing the hard work. It's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be fun. It's like everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody really wants to die. Everybody wants to lose weight and have a body like Brad Pitt. Like me, I want to look like Brad Pitt. But when it's time to go to the gym, sometimes I fold. Everybody wants to get paid like a surgeon, but nobody wants to go to school for 15 years. But in life, most of us know that there's one fundamental truth that runs the universe, and at least one, and it's that typically you get what you pay for. You get back what you put out. Your efforts are almost directly, entirely correlated with your results. So if you want to continue to pursue your objective of leading the nation when it comes to your commitment to diversity, it's very simple. You must also lead the nation when it comes to your efforts to pursue diversity. So speaking of overcoming the adversity for diversity, if you want to call it that, I remember thinking about a lot of times when I'm sitting there by myself in my house. I live by myself, so when you do that, you get lots of time to think about weird stuff. And I reflect on my life, and I think about when I was trying to get my PhD. And getting a PhD in finance is really, really, really hard. It's kind of like getting all your teeth pulled with no anesthetic every single day of your life. And I remember just having these moments where I just felt like this isn't supposed to happen for me. I can't do this. You know, right now, everybody, you know, they read the bio, and the bio sounds all impressive and stuff, and I'm almost embarrassed by the bio because I'm thinking, wow, they don't know how many times I failed, how many times I fell on my face, how many times I just didn't think I was ever going to accomplish anything, how many days I sat there and cried at my desk. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried. I believe that if you went through a PhD program and you didn't cry at least 5 times or want to strangle your dissertation advisor at some point, then you didn't go to a really good school. So no one in my family had ever really done anything like this. So it was kind of difficult. I remember I lost my family, actually. I had this woman I was going to marry, and she decided she wanted to marry somebody else who didn't study 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I remember feeling depressed. I remember my mother calling me one day at 6 p.m. on a really busy day. I had a lot of stuff to do that day, but I was still in bed at 6 p.m. And she said, "Why are you still in bed?" I said, "What's the point in getting up? I can't do this." And I remember one day where I just said, "No, I'm going to get back up. I'm not going to let this take me out. I've hit rock bottom emotionally and psychologically, and I will die. I will let myself die at my desk before I walk out of here without getting the degree that I came for." And so hitting that rock bottom moment, going through that adversity, is what strengthened me to eventually achieve my goal. And I remember when I walked down the aisle and I was getting my degree, and I actually cried again. I sound like a big baby now. I'm admitting all these times that I cried. And I just found out that I was actually the only African American in the country to get a PhD in finance that year. And I said, "Oh, so that's why it was so difficult. I thought I was just stupid." So when you talk about these sorts of battles, when you talk about fulfilling the dream, and I tell that story because that was a microcosm of a situation where I just said, you know what, I've got a dream. I'm not going to give up on that dream. I'm going to do what it takes to achieve that dream. Well, collectively as a society, Dr. King's dream can be thought of in the same way. There are going to be times where it's not going to be easy, and you've probably run into those times. From what I heard, there was an incident on campus not too long ago that led to some controversy. And I believe that those incidents are very good for a campus. I think those are the times where you get to pull the issues out on the table and talk about the things that you need to talk about. I think those are the times where you have to confront your past, confront the institution itself, challenge your ways of thinking, and grow from that. And one example, one person that I actually get inspiration from, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, is actually Michael Jordan. And the reason I'm embarrassed to say that Michael Jordan inspires me is because he's a jerk, actually, in real life. Michael Jordan's not a very nice guy. But let me tell you why he inspires me. Michael Jordan, I remember when he came into the NBA, he was this amazing player. He was really quick. He could jump and dunk over anybody. He scored 33, 34 points a game. He was this amazing superstar, blah, blah, blah. But his team wasn't very good. The Chicago Bulls were horrible. And so everybody pretty much said, well, yeah, you know, he's a great athlete. He's a great player, but he's not a team player. He scores all the points, and he doesn't pass the ball. So he'll never win because he doesn't know how to share the ball. So Michael Jordan took the criticism, and it upset him a little bit, but he worked through it. He learned how to pass the ball, and eventually he became the assist leader for the entire NBA. So he not only learned how to pass the ball reasonably well, he actually learned how to pass the ball better than anybody else in the league. And so the team started winning more games. But then people said, well, you know, Jordan can pass the ball and he's a great scorer, but he'll never achieve his dream of winning a championship because he doesn't play defense. He can only play offense. All he can do is score, and that's it. So Michael Jordan took the criticism to heart. He worked on his defense relentlessly. And eventually he became the NBA Defensive Player of the Year. And then people said, well, okay, now the Bulls are good. Now they're actually getting to the point where they have a chance to compete in the championship. They're going deep in the playoffs. They are a solid team because Jordan's got a more complete game. But there was this team called the Detroit Pistons. And the Detroit Pistons said, no, we got him figured out. We have Jordan rules. Remember that cover of Sports Illustrated? And they said, oh, we know how to stop this guy. He's quick, and he's a great player, and he plays good defense. But when he comes and he jumps through the middle of the lane, all we have to do is pull our arm out and whack him in the head. And he'll never do that again for the rest of the game because he's scrawny, he's skinny, and he's weak, and we're tough, and we're big, and we're strong. So Jordan was never able to win a championship because he kept hitting that obstacle. Detroit took him out every time. Well, Jordan took the criticism to heart. Jordan got a strength coach, and the strength coach worked with him and made him one of the strongest players in the NBA. And that's when he won his first championship. And then after he won his first championship, he won his second and his third. So he became a legend at that point. But the hurdles weren't over yet. There's one last thing. Then Jordan got to the point where he started getting old. So he used to be able to jump over people and dunk on them and play defense and all this other stuff, but he couldn't shoot the ball. And so even though he was a great player, he wasn't as great as he thought he should be because he couldn't shoot. Well, Jordan, again, repeating the process that made him great before, worked on his shooting to the point where he became one of the best shooters in the NBA. And that's how he won his 4th, 5th, and 6th championship as a 35, 36, 37-year-old man. So what's the point in this? The point here is that when you are addressing your obstacles, when you run into things that challenge you, when you have a weakness, I think the Michael Jordan philosophy does apply. Michael Jordan's philosophy was simple. He said, look, when I have a weakness, I work on that weakness until it becomes my strength. Not until I overcome the weakness. I don't avoid the weakness. I don't pretend like the weakness isn't there. I confront it, and I make it into my strength. So when we fight to pursue Dr. King's dream, when we look at America, diversity, multiculturalism, equality, civil rights, that's not America's strength right now. The United Nations has actually sanctioned or tried to the United States. They've written reports saying, look, in your society, in your country, you have a 2-tiered way of living. You have the way white folks live and the way black people live. If you look at the educational system, some people get access to quality education, but some people get access to terrible education. If you look at the economic system, some people get plenty of jobs. And then some people have to live with 15, 16, 17% unemployment. When you look at your prison system, some people get some degree of fairness in the justice system, but then there are some people who are victims of mass incarceration. So in America, we've got a long way to go. And so the truth is that change is not comfortable. Change is not easy. Change certainly isn't cheap. And change does not come without controversy. You can almost compare it to the pain of childbirth or weight loss or fighting a revolution. If you go fight a battle, if you go fight in a war, even if you win, you feel like you've lost. You're bloody, you're tired, you've lost friends, you've gone through hell. So even when you win, you don't feel like you really won because it was that difficult. Now, the next thing I think that this university wants to remember as you pursue your goal to achieve greater diversity is to remember that diversity is more than skin deep. Because some people are tempted to buy into the simple idea that says that if somebody looks different from me, or they have a different gender from me, or a different sexual orientation from me, they are different from me. And I think about this episode of this great TV show that used to come on back in the 70s and 80s called Alice. Anybody remember that show? Any old people in here? I got gray in my beard, so I'm one of the old people now. Well, I remember on the show, there was this waitress called Florence who kind of had a sassy attitude. And one day Florence came in and she was in a bad mood. And so the guy comes in and he picks up his to-go order. And she hands him a bag and she says, "Here you go, one fish sandwich." And he looks in the bag and he says, "Oh, no, Florence, I know you were giving me the usual, and I know I eat fish every day, but I didn't want fish this time. I want a chicken. I want to sort of spread things out a little bit. I want to eat something a little different. So can I get chicken instead of fish?" And so Florence is in a bad mood, so she takes the wrapper off the sandwich and puts it in a new wrapper and writes chicken on the sandwich and says, "Here you go, one chicken sandwich." And sometimes we treat diversity the same way. We think that if someone is different from us cosmetically, that they're going to bring a different set of ideas to the table. And in fact, sometimes diversity, and again, this is not to point fingers at anybody or to attack anybody, it's human nature. Sometimes we accept people in spite of who they are rather than because of who they are. We say, look, as long, we haven't had people like you here before, but as long as you talk like us and walk like us and act like us and think like us, then you can be one of us. I'm sorry, folks, but that's not diversity. That is not diversity. It's something else, but it's not diversity. It might be tokenism, but it's not diversity. So, why is diversity so difficult? Well, because to some extent it's counter to human nature. It's not easy to share power when it comes to making decisions on how an institution is going to be run and what's going to happen in the future. It's not easy to share money. It's not easy to share opportunities and resources. But when we do that, when we're able to rise up and commit ourselves to something greater than ourselves, I argue that we're becoming the very best that America can be. We're actually becoming what we've always said that we were all along. So we have to continue to close that gap between what we say we are and what we actually are. Because in America, racism's a problem in some places, absolutely, right? There are people who maybe use the N-word or discriminate against someone because of the color of their skin, and we know that stuff happens, but I would argue that that's not the biggest problem. I've never had any of my colleagues call me the N-word on the way in or hang a noose from my door or any of these other crazy things that happen. That doesn't really happen that much. It happens sometimes, but I don't think that's the real problem. I think that the real problem is not racism, but actually racial inequality, which is a product of racism. It's an artifact of having a country that has lived a certain way where you clearly and undeniably decided long ago that certain people would live one way, another group of people were going to live an entirely different way. That one group was going to have opportunities, another group was not. We know that that's the past. We know that that's America's history. We know that that's not deniable. And so what happens as a result? Well, institutions are formulated built on this structural inequality. So you can have racial discrimination and racial inequality when there's not a racist person in the building. It's not a matter of pointing fingers and blaming people. It's a matter of looking at the institution around you and figuring out what are the artifacts of historical racism that exist in this institution, and how do we confront that? How do we challenge that? Like, how many of you might have been surprised if you walked in this building and saw a white guy or a black guy on the wall right there? That would shock the hell out of me. I don't know about you, right? And no disrespect to the founders, of course, but we know where we come from. And a way I can compare it is, it's almost like, imagine if there's a company that has toxic waste. And there's a way you're supposed to get rid of toxic waste. My friend, the chemistry professor, could probably explain it to me even better than I understand it. But you're not supposed to just dump it in your garbage or throw it in the lake or anything like that, right? You're supposed to go through a process to get rid of toxic waste. Well, let's say that this company says, we could do it that way, but actually we can save money if we simply back our truck up to the local lake and just dump the waste in the lake. Nobody will know. The lake's big, and it's no big deal. So let's say they do that, and they do that every day. That's what they do with their waste. They don't dispose of it properly. They just dump it into the lake every time. And then as the company gets bigger, and then the waste grows, and over time it accumulates, and eventually the lake starts to show effects. The fish start to die, the lake starts to stink, the water supply gets infected, and all these other horrible things. So let's say the Environmental Protection Agency gets word of this, and they go to the lake, and they do their tests, and they realize that the lake is toxic, so they do their investigation. They find out that this company is responsible for polluting the lake. So the head of the EPA, let's say he goes to, or she, goes to meet with the head of the company and says, look, we've done our investigation, and we know that you, for the last 40 years, your company has been dumping toxic waste in this lake, and it's destroyed the water supply. It's done irreparable harm to the ecosystem, and you've done a lot of damage here, and that's a serious problem. So let's say the CEO says, I know what you're talking about. You know what? I'm an honest guy. I'm a straight shooter, and I've seen that lake, and I know how bad it is, and I don't let my kids swim in that lake. I mean, oh my God, it's a horrible, horrible place. And I know that my company in the past has been responsible for what's happened to this lake. We've dumped our toxic waste there, and we shouldn't have done it, and we shouldn't do it anymore. So we had a meeting, and we decided in that meeting that we're not going to ever dump toxic waste in that lake again. So we promise you we'll never do it again. Are we done here? How do you think that meeting would go? It wouldn't go so well, right? So no, the EPA, the head of the EPA would say, no, wait, you don't understand. You see, there's been damage done to this lake because of your actions. So it's not enough for you to stop doing it. Someone actually has to go in and pay for this. Someone has to pay to get the lake clean. Someone has to clean this stuff up and make the water healthy again, and help the fish come back to life. And it's going to cost billions, and someone's got to pay for that. And the only people I can think of would be you and your company. And so let's say the CEO says, okay, I get it. I'm with you on that. I completely understand. And so. And so I know someone should pay for that, and the mess has to be cleaned up. But let me tell you something. Look, I've only been CEO for 2 years, and my whole entire board has only been around 5 years. So everything that happened before we got here, that's not our responsibility, right? We didn't make the mess, so why should we have to clean it up? How silly would that argument sound? It would sound ridiculous. But when you talk about diversity and racial inequality and all these other problems in our society that have accumulated over 400 years of toxic social waste being thrown into our society as it pertains to racism, our country's done a lot of great things, but when it comes to race, our track record isn't so good. You hear people say, well, no, racism's going to go away and racial inequality will go away because we stopped being racist. We're not going to do it anymore, right? Or then they might say, well, no, we know that black children are 40% likely to be in poverty. And we know that black unemployment is 16, 17%. And we know that black family wealth levels are about 1/50th that of everyone else. But we didn't do it. I didn't do it. That was them. But the truth is that some of us benefited from the actions of those in the past. Forefathers on up. You can't deny that. So again, it's not a matter of pointing fingers, it's a matter of stating facts. Now, whether we want to address those facts or confront those facts is up to us. But when we go through our society and we see corporations that have 50 managers and only one of them is African American, or maybe my friend works for a law firm and she says, yeah, we have 500 associates and 2 of us are black female. And they're proud of that. Like they're saying, yeah, look at us. And I'm thinking, that's awfully sick. 2 out of 500, are you kidding me? That's unbelievable. So when you look at institutions and you see the diversity problems that have come from a way of doing things that have excluded certain people from the decision-making process, it's up to all of us to decide if we're going to confront it or if we're going to pretend like it never happened, or if we're going to just blame the group that has been oppressed. It's entirely up to us. So So as we move forward and as we talk about the future, and we talk about pursuing Dr. King's dream, we talk about making America the country that we want it to be. The reality is that we have to talk about our history. You see, a lot of people get upset. They say, well, why do you keep talking about the past? Why do you keep bringing up the past? You know, we're trying to move to the future. We want to talk about the present. The past doesn't matter anymore. But that's not true. The past has everything to do with the present and the future. The reason this building exists right now in the present is because 80 years ago, some people got some concrete and bricks and wood and everything else that it takes to create a building, and they built this structure. And that's why we have a place to sit right now. When you look at the American flag and you see the stars and stripes and you see it's red, white, and blue, that's because at some point in the past, somebody said, well, how do we design this flag? Maybe we should use red, white, and fuchsia. How about that? And no, that wouldn't work. Let's try red, white, and blue. Okay, yeah, that'll look good. Let's do that. And so now we have our flag. The reason all of us are sitting in this room is because maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, somebody threw on some romantic music and decided to spend some quality time together. Some Barry Manilow or Marvin Gaye or something. Or some man saw a beautiful woman across the room and said, you know, maybe I should ask her out on a date. That's how we all got here today. So you can't talk about the present without talking about the past. Without the past, there is no present and there is no future. So you have to understand all three in order to pursue your goals. Now, the last thing I want to share with you that relates to Dr. King and the pursuit of the dream and how we all play a role in this, and I cannot emphasize enough that all of us are players in this game. Every single one of us has a role in this process. It's up to you to decide if you want to embrace it or walk away from it. I have a confession to make. I have to tell you, I don't really have that many friends that, you know, the public people. I get to do stuff on TV and stuff, and people see you there and everything, but a lot of my friends don't really like me that much. You know, I used to be pretty cool with Al Sharpton, but he stopped talking to me when I addressed something that was going on, something with him and Obama that I didn't like. And the Obama administration, they used to call me to, you know, because when people know you write stuff and say stuff that people are going to listen to, they try to call you and lobby you. You know what politicians do. And they just said, oh, we're going to give up on this guy. This guy, you know, he won't listen. And so, and when I was a kid, my mother warned me. My mother used to say, she'd say, boy, your mouth will either make you great or it will get you killed. I'm curious to see which one. And so I, as I've gone through my life, constantly burning bridges, and I have to make a note to self, stop upsetting important, powerful people. It's not good for you. I think about when I got a call from one of Reverend Sharpton's people, and we were talking about the King Memorial. And so what they said is, they said, look, Dr. Watkins, we've got this memorial that's being built, and it's the first memorial for an African American. It's going to be the last one built in this mall, and it's for Dr. King, and it's going to be this amazing thing, and we're going to hold a march and a rally, and we'd like for you to speak. And I said, oh, okay, so let me think about it. Okay, so I did my research, and I said, okay, well, what's the deal with this monument? What is, or this memorial? What's this all about? So I looked around and I found out that the memorial was going to cost about $120 million. It's a lot of money. Okay, I figure it's going to probably look pretty cool for $120 million. And I looked to see who was paying for this, where the money was coming from, and I said, okay, well, all right. So the first major donation was given by Walmart, which is a company that's accused of numerous and highly egregious labor rights violations on a regular basis. Okay, I don't know how Dr. King would feel about that. And then I went down the list and I saw Wells Fargo, the company that was being sued by the federal government for taking billions and billions of dollars from minorities across the country through predatory lending. They took my grandfather's house. Okay, so all right, so check. That's another strike against this my support for the memorial. And so I didn't say that I don't support the memorial, because I love Dr. King. We all love him. We so appreciate what he gave our country. But I said, you know, I really can't buy into the Dr. King Memorial brought to you by Walmart. I said, because if Dr. King were alive today, he'd be protesting Walmart. Dr. King would be highly critical of the fact that our country, Dr. King stood for peace, and we live in a country where we're waging war on other countries just so that we can get their oil. Dr. King would be highly upset about the fact that poverty levels have risen all across America and not just in the black community. He would be incredibly disturbed by the fact that the wealth gap in America has increased so much, that when the recession started, black family wealth was 1/10 that of white families. Since the recession began, that number has dropped from 1/10 to 1/50th, taking us back to where we were in 1982. He'd be upset that the average real wage of the American worker has not gone up in 10 years, that our educational systems are failing to the point where our nation's future is in jeopardy because our kids are not being properly educated. I don't think Dr. King would be happy right now. I don't think Dr. King would want us having a big party with this big and expensive memorial. I think Dr. King would want us out here doing his work. I think Dr. King would say, okay, with $120 million, how many hungry children could you feed with $120 million? How many homeless families could get shelter with $120 million? How many teachers' salaries could you pay for all these teachers you're laying off all across the country so our kids aren't being educated? They're being educated even worse than they were before. How many teachers' salaries could you pay with this money? So we got to get real. When you talk about the legacy of Dr. King, we've got to truly begin to understand what it really means to celebrate this man's life. We have to earn the right to honor Dr. King. Many of us haven't earned the right. We certainly haven't earned the right as a country. We're almost like Tony Soprano from the Sopranos, that mafia TV show. We're like Tony Soprano going to church right before he leaves church and cuts someone's head off. It's entirely hypocritical in many circumstances. And that is just the honest to goodness truth. So if we respect Dr. King, we must also respect what he stood for. Many of us already feel that way. And again, I'm not even pointing the finger at this university. There are other campuses that I'm going to speak at where I will sort of say, whoa, you guys have to do things different. But you guys are trying so hard. And I want to encourage you to help you understand you're doing the right thing. But then also at the same time, you have to do more of the right thing. You have to realize that we celebrate Dr. King by pursuing the ideals and the values that he left us. That's how we keep Dr. King alive. Dr. King is not a man. Dr. King is a spirit. He's not about one dream and one speech or one McDonald's commercial and all these other things that we've done to reduce his image. Dr. King is better than that. He's more than that. But the really important thing, and I want you to really remember this as I walk off this stage, is that there is a Dr. King inside all of us. Every one of us has a role. Every one of us has an ink pen that we get to individually use to decide how we're going to write our history. What we do when we walk out of this room is our contribution to America's history. So never underemphasize the importance of your role in pursuing Dr. King's dream and ultimately in making America better. Thank you very much.